There are just some things that fill me with indescribable joy. Certain things that invoke both emotion and happiness from within me. We all have particular things like that will forever hold in high regard. Things we will cherish forever. We all had that one cartoon when we were a kid that we were obsessed with. For some it was SpongeBob, others Dragon Ball Z, or Justice League, or this. But for me, that cartoon came in the form of Cartoon Network's hit series, Ben 10. Ben 10 is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, and had a huge impact on my childhood. There weren't many things that came close to being as important to me as Ben 10 was when I was a kid. And it even rivaled other apparently important things such as hygiene and education. Stupid mom, you could never understand how important Ben 10 is. You'd think I'd be blinded with nostalgia because I grew up with this show, but I watched quite a few episodes when researching for this video. And I have to say, it still matches the expectations I had for it years ago. It's not something that's only good because I want it to be as good as I remember it being. Ben 10 is actually as good as I remember it. And it doesn't matter how old I get, I think I will still be in love with this show. So in this episode of Cherished Forever, it's hero time. Oh yeah, right, it doesn't actually work. Most kids my age wanted to be Superman, or Batman, or Spider-Man, but me? Nah mate, I wanted an Omnitrix, because it had all of those powers and more, just without the dead parents. I recall very fond memories of my friends and I running around the schoolyard and pretending to be Ben and transforming into various aliens. We probably looked like we were insane, but it was a good time nonetheless. I was so obsessed with this show, in fact, that my parents became quite concerned of how much time I was spending watching it. Then, one fateful day, some dumbass journalist wrote a newspaper article describing how the show was too violent and scary for kids. Australian media is absolutely garbage.
Welcome back. Fortnite is the latest video game kids can't get enough of, but when does a bit of harmless fun turn into an unhealthy obsession?
Hello, yes, we are the fun police. Are you having fun? Yeah? Yeah, we're gonna have to ask you to, stop doing that, please. So, naturally, my parents decided that Ben 10 was corrupting my young and vulnerable brain, and tried to stop me from watching it. Which was a very stupid decision. I mean, I turned out alright. I went, as I remember, half a freaking year without watching Ben 10. Do you know what that does to a man? Anyway, it lasted that long until they just stopped caring. And around that time, the show had reached one of its best two-parters yet, and it was then that my love for the show was absolutely solidified. Look, I love my parents, but no one gets between me and my grandpa Max. The show has a pretty simple concept. Two cousins, Ben and Gwen, stuck with each other as they go on a summer vacation with their grandpa Max. That is, until Ben finds a really cool watch and then suddenly the whole goddamn universe wants him dead. You know, your usual summer vacation. This watch, the Omnitrix, allows him to transform into 10 aliens, and also later, way more than 10. You know, as a kid, this was just the coolest thing ever. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, and I still enjoy watching it today. They just don't make cartoons like this anymore. I mean, they do. But you know what I mean. It was the perfect Saturday morning cartoon, what with its interesting Monster of the Week formula. And going with that trope, almost every episode introduced or saw the return of a villain. And every episode was vastly different and equally interesting. Ben 10 never overstayed its welcome. Each episode was distinctly unique on its own, perfectly combining its fantastic premise with various other elements and themes. Ben goes up against aliens, criminals, robots, knights, disgusting bug creatures from outer space that want to suck the earth dry of any life and kill everyone on it. Yeah, that episode was kind of messed up. What I'm trying to say is that no episode of Ben 10 was boring. I would have loved to be in the writing room when they came up with some of these batshit insane ideas. They all sound completely ridiculous in concept, but they were executed incredibly well. And the writers showed that their creativity wasn't limited to the awesomeness of the Omnitrix. Although, the Omnitrix allegedly has a 10-minute time limit for each alien. Get it? 10? To prevent the alien DNA from taking over Ben's or something, I don't know. But I'm questioning how long the show thinks 10 minutes really is. It's almost as reliable as Frieza's 5 minutes until Namek explodes in Dragon Ball Z, which was actually like 10 episodes. Following the end of the first season, what followed is still one of my favorite plot twists in cartoon history, where, in the second season, spoilers for a 12-year-old show, I'm not really sure this is necessary, but hey, you never know. Max reveals he is part of the secret government organization known as the Plumbers, who basically serve as the Space Ghostbusters, which was not so subtly foreshadowed in the series.
Think he's gonna stay a monster forever?
He's not a monster. He's an alien.
I mean, look at him.
That's not suspicious at all. It added a whole nother dynamic to the show, with Max being experienced in dealing with aliens and revealing himself to be quite the badass. There are just so many fantastic ideas that went into this series. Ignoring the amazing Omnitrix for a moment, there's the ideas of the plumbers, Kevin 11, Gwen and her magic, the fact that the Omnitrix isn't a weapon but a research tool, the fact that the Omnitrix was created by an alien who was the same species as grey matter, and just everything about the Omnitrix. And on that note, the series' movie, Ben 10's Secret of the Omnitrix, is one of the best cartoon movies I've ever seen. The movie does everything in its power to answer questions and expand upon the lore of the series, while still delivering one of the best adventures Ben 10 has to offer. The show is just epic, for lack of a better description. So many fantastic stories that build up to a climactic battle, and rarely does the show disappoint. Rarely. And I still remember my reaction for the first time when I watched the absolutely epic two-parter Ben 10 versus the Negative 10, where villains from across the series came together to beat the ever-living shit out of Ben. It was just one of those, oh no, moments that never really leaves you. And to be honest, I would be lying if I said this show still didn't fill me with the same childlike wonder today that it did years ago. Sure, a lot of the episodes were pretty weird, such as the ones where Ben and Gwen turn into elves, or swap bodies, or when Ben and Max become younger, or when Ben gets sick and his aliens get sick. And yeah, now that I said it out loud, I don't know what they were thinking. The writers obviously had so much fun with the concepts in the series that they even did a few what-if episodes, including an episode set in the future, which has one of the most brutal final fights I've ever seen. Alright, Ben, you gotta defeat Kevin. Whoa, Ben, stop! You already got him! He's already dead! Ben, stop! Oh god! Why? Yeah, you got him. And another one where Gwen gets the Omnitrix instead of Ben. But, of course, the show's biggest highlight for me were the amazing action sequences. The show was violent, like, surprisingly violent for its target audience, but it was awesome, and that was all that mattered. Each of Ben's aliens provided their own unique method of combat, and one of the show's most enjoyable parts was sitting in anticipation to see what alien Ben would transform into. Of course, the one everyone wanted to see was Forearms, because duh, but the show cleverly had the watch malfunction to never really turn Ben into what he wanted to turn into, forcing him to adapt to the situation accordingly, and also explaining why he didn't just go way big all the time and step on everyone. It gave each of the aliens a reasonably balanced amount of screen time. That is, until he unlocked more aliens, and then they just became too many to keep up. Now he's got superpowers, he's no ordinary kid, he's Ben 12. Plus Ben Wolf and Ben Mummy and Ben Victor and Way Big and Upchuck. Each alien was distinctly different, and each had their own abilities unique to them. I'd even go as far as to call their designs iconic, simply because they're brilliantly designed, both visually and as characters. Forearms was, of course, the poster boy for the whole series, being the one with the most basic power, but also the alien that literally everyone loved the most. Come on, admit it, he was and still is awesome. Heat Blast was awesome, Accelerate was awesome, Ripjaws was awesome, Wild Mutt was no one's favorite alien, Upgrade and Grey Matter brought out the most creative solutions, Stinkfly was horrifying, Diamond Head is, of course, one of my favorites, both design-wise and for his powers. Can you guess who my other favorite is? Not many of the characters in the show react to the aliens' appearances, when in actuality each of the aliens would look absolutely terrifying in real life.
This is the part where you tell me your name, what your evil intentions are.
Ah, yeah, they do look horrifying in real life. I'll talk about those one day, I promise. Just today is not that day. It always did make me wonder what the aliens were wearing though. Like, are those clothes? What happens if Ben changes clothes? Do the aliens wear them as well? Because they did when Gwen turned into them. Why do only some aliens keep the clothes pattern but others don't? Also, the transformation sequences looked incredibly painful. They looked like they would have hurt a lot more than what Ben is making them look like. The action was extremely exaggerated, and though it does get a little ridiculous at times, it was just stupidly fun. One of the more ridiculous examples is in the episode Kevin 11, in which the titular character and Ben break into a warehouse to get their hands on some new video games, only to find that the goddamn SWAT team shows up a second later with like 100 helicopters. Still, as a kid, these kind of things you just didn't question. That kind of thing made total sense to me. I spent hours upon hours just sitting in front of the TV, sitting in awe of how good this show was. And years later, nothing has really changed. Except maybe it's a little weirder, and probably kind of sad. Forearms. Ben Tennyson was a fantastic protagonist, voiced wonderfully by Tara, I Voiced Your Entire Childhood Strong, who makes a surprisingly convincing 10-year-old boy. Despite being 10 years old, I don't think he was overly annoying. Sure, he could get a bit much at times, but he served as a surprisingly convincing and grounded character. I mean, his first reaction to getting the watch is essentially how you would think.
I'm on fire! I'm on fire!
His cousin, Gwen, served as the more logical of the two, and her personality clashing with Ben's created a great dynamic between the two. They bickered like most kids did, but that made the situations in which they actually worked together just that much more memorable. The latter seasons of the show decided to improve upon her character further by giving her the ability to use magic, and she became an active combatant just as Ben was. And much like her, Max was improved as soon as his past was uncovered, and he revealed his combat abilities. Seeing the three of them fight side by side was just fantastic. And it just added to the overall brilliantness of an already brilliant show. You might want to check the script on that one. The language certainly hasn't aged well, what with your dweebs and doofuses, but both Ben and Gwen are lovable despite their age. That being 10. If you weren't aware. And Ben being 10 years old really puts into perspective how dumb some of the alien names are. Like, Forearms, for example. Well done. Well done. That's, wow. Vilgax, the main antagonist of the series, is one of my favorite villains of all time. He initially starts off as being one of those villains that sits behind the scenes, giving commentary on events and not really doing much of anything. But when he finally does take matters into his own hands, shit gets real and fast. Ben 10's first season finale is one of my favorite episodes, where Vilgax finally comes down to Earth and absolutely beats the hell out of Ben. This was my very first oh shit moment when I was a kid. This show had a lot of firsts for me actually. Sure, Ben had been knocked down before, but never like this. Vilgax was an awesome villain, and honestly quite terrifying. But you know what was really terrifying? This disgusting, horrifying abomination. Can we just talk about Ghost Freak? Nothing about any of this was okay. None of it. None of that. If there was ever anything to represent the embodiment of my irrational childhood fears, it would be this thing. And I'm not saying that as a joke. I mean, Ghost Freak literally served as the embodiment of my fears in my nightmares. He visited me in the darkest hours of the night. Piece of shit. You know, in hindsight, maybe that newspaper article was onto something. This show was so ambitious that it had one of the original aliens Ben turned into escape from the Omnitrix, mutate into a demon monster abomination, and then become a recurring villain. That's awesome. I mean, I hate him, but that's awesome. A lot of the show's villains were great, most notably the more commonly recurring ones such as Dr. Animo, Charmcaster, and Kevin. And it was Ben's ever-expanding rogues gallery that kept the show interesting. Ben 10 managed a hell of a lot of world building in its 49 episodes, and the audience really got a good sense of how crazy the universe of this series was. What the show really heavily focused on was the idea of aliens, and that the ones Ben turned into weren't exclusive to the Omnitrix. Every time Ben encountered another one of his aliens, it blew my young mind. It's a show filled with an excess of fantastic characters and story concepts, and I can't quite put into words my appreciation for this series, even though I've been trying for the past 11 minutes. One thing my parents obviously missed was that Ben 10 had quite a large focus on morals. A lot of cartoons do this, but I didn't feel the ones in this show were forced or shoved down the viewers' throats. It was interesting to see Ben growing frustrated of not being able to use his powers for selfish reasons, as that's honestly how a 10-year-old would react if given this power. Ben 10 did have some good messages laid in there within its interesting stories and violent battles, but clearly someone missed that. Ben 10 was one of those shows that I was almost certain I would have grown out of by now. But even watching it back today, it's still a really good time. And I still want my own Omnitrix. Like a proper one that actually works. Try and bully me in school, huh? Accelerate. The sequels to Ben 10 were great too, with their own unique take on the series, and while I loved and grew up on them as well, none quite captivated me like the original show. Hopefully one day I can talk about them, because I love them almost as much as the original. Except you. You sit over there and you think about what you've done. I gotta admit though, the reboot's not terrible, but it just doesn't hold a candle to the original. But what I love about it is, after all this time, Ben 10 is still as prevalent as it was back in 2005. Cue the montage!